Steve Harvey has faced thousands of contestants on his game show stage. He's seen winners, losers, tears of joy, and crushing disappointment. But on one ordinary afternoon, something happened that completely shattered him. A dying contestant made a single wish. And what Steve did next didn't just shock the audience. It redefined what it means to be human on live television. It was just another Tuesday afternoon at the studio. The lights were bright. Impossibly bright. The kind of brightness that makes you forget what time of day it actually is. That erases the outside world and creates this bubble of artificial reality where nothing exists except the stage, the audience, and the game. The audience was buzzing with that electric energy they always bring. That mixture of hope and excitement, and the pure anticipation of watching someone's life potentially change in front of their eyes. Steve Harvey walked onto the stage with the confidence of a man who'd done this 10,000 times before. Maybe more. His suit was perfectly pressed. His smile was perfectly calibrated. His timing was impeccable. He knew every beat of this dance. He knew when to pause for effect. He knew exactly how long to let a moment breathe before pulling the audience back in with a joke or a question. He knew how to work a crowd like a conductor works an orchestra, building here, pulling back there, creating crescendos of laughter and tension and release. The game show machine was running perfectly. It always did. But today felt different. The first contestant came out, and Steve went through his usual routine with the precision of someone who could do it in their sleep. The handshake, firm but warm, making eye contact, making them feel seen and valued in that moment. The smile, genuine enough to be authentic, but practiced enough to be consistent. The questions about their life, their family, their dreams. Where are you from? What do you do? Tell me about your kids. What would you do with the money if you won? The audience laughed at the right moments. They gasped at the right moments. They cheered at the right moments. The game unfolded exactly as it always did, following a script that had been perfected over years and years of tapings. Money was won. Excitement was manufactured with surgical precision. Everything was exactly where it should be. Everything was comfortable. Everything was safe. And then she walked out. The second contestant of the day. And the moment, the exact moment, her feet touched that stage, something shifted in the air. Not dramatically, not obviously, but unmistakably. You could feel it like a change in air pressure before a storm. The audience felt it. The camera operators felt it. The producers in the control room felt it. Even Steve felt it, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. She was thin, not just slim or petite. Thin in a way that spoke of something deeper, something medical, something that went beyond simple body type. Her skin had a translucence to it that suggested she'd been through something. Her smile was genuine. You could see it in her eyes, see the warmth there. But there was a fragility to it. A strength underneath? Yes, absolutely. You could see the strength in the way she carried herself, in the way she held her head up. But there was also a weight, a heaviness, a burden that no amount of stage lighting could hide or minimize. Steve did what he always does. He greeted her warmly. He asked her name, where she was from, what she did for a living. Standard questions, the kind that fill the first few minutes before the game truly begins. The kind that are designed to make contestants comfortable, to make them feel like they're having a conversation rather than participating in a televised game show. But as she answered, Steve noticed something. Her family was in the audience. They were watching her with an intensity that went beyond normal game show enthusiasm. Her mother's hands were clasped together so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The kind of white that comes from cutting off blood circulation because you're holding on so hard. Her husband sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, holding her like he was afraid she might disappear. Like if he let go for even a second, she might vanish. Their teenage daughter was leaning forward, eyes locked on the contestant on stage with a focus that was almost painful to witness. This wasn't just a family hoping their loved one would win money and go on a vacation or pay off some bills. This was a family that was afraid. Hopeful, yes. But underneath that hope was something else. Something darker. Something desperate. Something that made Steve's instincts, the instincts he'd honed over decades of reading people, of interviewing thousands of guests, of understanding the human condition in all its complexity, start firing warning signals. He continued with the game anyway. That's what you do? That's the format. That's the machine. You don't break protocol. You don't deviate from the script. You keep moving forward because millions of people are watching and advertisers have paid millions of dollars, and there's a schedule to keep and a show to maintain. But he was watching her now. Really watching her. Not the performative watching that he did with every contestant. Not the professional observation that was part of his job. This was different. This was personal. The way she held the microphone, like it was something precious and fragile. The slight tremor in her voice when she laughed, not from nervousness, but from something physical, something medical. The way her eyes would dart to her family in the audience, as if she was drawing strength from them just by seeing their faces. As if their presence was the only thing keeping her anchored to this moment. The way she took each question seriously, like every single word mattered more than it should. Like every moment on this stage might be one of the last moments she had. Steve had interviewed thousands of people over his career. He could read a room like most people read a book. He could sense when someone was lying, when someone was performing, when someone was genuinely present. And what he was reading from this woman, from her posture, from her energy, from the way she moved and spoke, was that this wasn't ordinary. And what he was reading from her family, from their desperation, from their hope, from the way they were holding on to each other, was that this was sacred. The audience could sense it too. The usual chatter had quieted. The ambient noise of a game show studio, the shuffling, the coughing, the whispered conversations had faded. People were leaning in. The energy in the studio had shifted fundamentally. It had shifted from entertainment to something more profound. Something that the game show format wasn't really designed to hold. Something that existed on a different plane entirely. Steve kept his professional composure. He always did. That was his job. That was what he was paid to do. But internally, he was alert in a way he hadn't been all day. He was present. He was listening not just to her words, but to what lay beneath her words. He was watching not just her movements, but what those movements revealed about her soul. And then came the moment when the contestant had to make an impossible choice. Her name was Sarah. Sarah Mitchell, 42 years old, from a small town in Ohio that most people had never heard of. She worked as a high school art teacher, or at least that's what she said when Steve asked. But the way she said it, the slight hesitation before she answered, suggested that worked might be the operative word. Past tense. Something that was no longer happening. Steve didn't push. Not yet. That wasn't his style. He knew how to let information unfold naturally, how to ask the right questions that would make people volunteer the truth without feeling interrogated. Art teacher, Steve repeated, nodding with genuine interest. That's wonderful. You must inspire a lot of young people. Sarah smiled. It was a real smile, but it carried weight. I try to. Art is about expression, you know? It's about finding your voice and letting it out into the world. Even when that voice is small, even when nobody's listening. There was something in that answer that went deeper than small talk. Steve recognized it immediately. She wasn't just talking about teaching art. She was talking about something personal. Something that mattered to her in a way that transcended the typical game show contestant narrative. He glanced at her family in the audience. Her mother had tears in her eyes already, and they hadn't even started playing the game yet. Her husband's jaw was clenched. Their daughter was gripping the armrest of her seat like she was holding on for dear life. "Well, I'm sure your students are lucky to have you," Steve said. And he meant it. But he was also filing away this information, adding it to the growing sense that something significant was happening here. They moved into the game. Sarah knew the rules. She'd watched the show before, like most people who come on it. She understood the format: answer questions, accumulate money, make it to the end with as much as possible. Simple, clean, straightforward. But Sarah played differently than most contestants. Most people who come on game shows are thinking about the money. They're thinking about what they could buy, where they could travel, how they could change their lives. It's not a bad thing. It's human nature. Money represents possibility. Money represents freedom. Sarah, though, seemed to be playing for something else entirely. When she answered questions, she did so thoughtfully, deliberately, like each answer was a choice that mattered. When she won money, she didn't celebrate the way most contestants did. There was no fist pump, no shouting. Just a quiet nod like she was acknowledging something she already knew. Steve began to notice the pattern, the way she held herself, the way she breathed, sometimes shallow, sometimes catching slightly, like her body was working harder than it should have to. The way her hands trembled sometimes when she reached for the microphone, though she tried to hide it, and the way she kept looking at her family, not with the typical "look how well I'm doing" energy that most contestants have, but with something else, something that looked almost like goodbye. During a commercial break, those precious few minutes when the cameras stopped rolling and the audience relaxed, Steve found himself studying her more carefully. He'd learned over the years to read people in these moments, when they thought nobody was watching, when their guard came down. Sarah's guard didn't come down. If anything, she held herself more carefully during the break. She sat perfectly still. She didn't wave at her family. She didn't chat with the production assistants. She just existed, quietly, peacefully almost, like she was conserving energy for something. When they came back from the break, Steve made a decision. He wasn't going to follow the script exactly. He was going to deviate slightly, just enough to see what was really going on. "Sarah," he said, his voice shifting from the typical game show energy to something more genuine. "I want to ask you something that's not on the card. Is that okay?" Sarah looked surprised. Most contestants were. The game show format doesn't usually allow for deviation, for authenticity, for real human connection. "Of course," she said. "You seem like someone who has a lot on their mind," Steve said carefully. "Someone who's carrying something. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean there's something about you. Something real. Something that goes beyond this game." The audience went quiet. This wasn't part of the show. This was something different. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, not the performative tears that sometimes happen on game shows. Real tears, the kind that come from a deep place. She started, then stopped. She looked at her family in the audience. Her mother was openly crying now. Her husband had his arm around her even tighter. Their daughter's face was crumpling. "It's okay," Steve said gently. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to." But Sarah did want to answer. You could see it in her face. She'd been carrying this alone for so long, and someone was finally asking. Someone was finally seeing her. "I'm sick," she said quietly. The words hung in the air like they weighed 1,000 pounds. "I have stage 4 cancer. The doctors they said I have maybe 6 months, maybe less." The entire studio went silent. The audience wasn't sure how to react. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. They came to watch a game show, not to witness someone's mortality laid bare on live television. But Steve understood immediately. He understood why her family was watching so intensely. He understood why she played each question like it mattered. He understood why she kept looking at them like she was trying to memorize their faces. He understood that this wasn't just a game show moment. This was a woman who was saying goodbye. And she was doing it on live television, in front of millions of people, because maybe, just maybe, if she said it here, if she acknowledged it, if she let people see her as she really was, then her life would have meant something. Then her story wouldn't just disappear. Steve sat with that revelation for a moment. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He didn't crack a joke to lighten the mood. He just sat there, letting the weight of what Sarah had shared settle over the studio like a blanket. The cameras were still rolling. Millions of people were watching. But in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the woman sitting across from him, who had just told the world that she was dying. "Sarah," Steve said finally, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Thank you for trusting us with that. Thank you for being so brave." Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. "I wanted people to know," she said. "I didn't want to just disappear. I wanted to be here, to be seen, to matter." "You matter," Steve said, and he meant every word. "You absolutely matter." He glanced at the production team. He could see them in his peripheral vision, scrambling. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't what they'd planned. But they were professionals, and they understood that something significant was happening. Something that transcended the typical game show format. "Sarah, I want to ask you something," Steve continued. "And I want you to know that whatever you say, we're going to make it happen. What is your wish? What is the one thing you want before your time runs out?" The question hung in the air. It was bold. It was vulnerable. It was asking Sarah to articulate something that most people never have to say out loud. Sarah looked at her family again. Her mother was sobbing openly now. Her husband had his face buried in his hands. Their daughter was gripping her mother's arm like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. "I want to spend time with them," Sarah said quietly. "I want to travel with my family. I want to go somewhere beautiful. Somewhere we can all be together, without thinking about hospitals or treatments or the end. I want to make memories. Real ones, the kind that last." Steve nodded. He understood. This wasn't about winning a game show. This was about living, about squeezing every last drop of meaning out of the time she had left. "How much money would you need?" Steve asked. "I don't know," Sarah said. 50,000, 100,000, enough to take them somewhere nice, somewhere we can just be." Steve looked directly into the camera. He was breaking protocol now, completely abandoning the script. But he didn't care. "I'm going to make you a promise, Sarah," He said, "You're going to finish this game. You're going to play it out. And whatever you win, we're going to match it. Dollar for dollar. And if that's not enough, we'll find a way to make it enough." Because this isn't about a game show anymore. This is about a woman who deserves to live her last months the way she wants to live them. The audience erupted. Not in the typical game show way, with cheering and excitement, but in a deeper way. People were standing up. People were crying. People were witnessing something real, something true, something that mattered. Sarah's family was losing it. Her mother was sobbing uncontrollably. Her husband had pulled their daughter close, and they were holding each other, like they were the only solid things in a world that was falling apart. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. "Thank you so much." "Don't thank me yet," Steve said with a slight smile. "Let's finish this game. Let's see how much money we can get you." And they did. Sarah played the remaining questions with a new energy. Not desperation, but purpose. She knew what the money meant now. It wasn't abstract. It was concrete. It was a trip to Italy with her family. It was watching the sunset over the Mediterranean with the people she loved most. It was making memories that would outlast her. She won, not the jackpot. The odds were against her, and that was okay. But she won enough. $75,000. When Steve doubled it, matched it with his own pledge, it became $150,000. When he announced the final amount, Sarah collapsed. Not literally, she stayed in her seat, but emotionally. She folded in on herself, overwhelmed by the reality of what had just happened, what she had just been given. Steve came around from behind his desk and hugged her. It was against protocol. It was unprofessional. It was exactly what needed to happen. "Go live," he whispered to her. "Go make those memories. Go be with the people you love." Sarah held on to him like he was a life raft in an ocean of uncertainty. And maybe, in that moment, he was. When they finally separated, Sarah's family rushed the stage. The producers didn't stop them. They knew better. They understood that some moments transcended the rules of television. Sarah's mother wrapped her daughter in her arms. Her husband kissed the top of her head. Their daughter held on to both of them, and they stood there together, a family bound by love and loss, by hope and heartbreak, by the simple human need to be together. The cameras captured all of it. The audience watched all of it. Millions of people at home witnessed all of it. And something shifted in the world that day. It wasn't a big shift. It wasn't the kind of shift that makes headlines or changes policies or transforms society overnight. But it was a shift nonetheless. A moment when people remembered what mattered. When they remembered that life is precious and short and that the people we love are the only thing that really matters in the end. Steve stood to the side, watching the family embrace. He had tears in his eyes, too. He wasn't performing anymore. He wasn't being the game show host. He was just being human, just being present to witness a moment of profound grace. One of the producers approached him during the commercial break. "That was incredible," she said. "Do you know what you just did?" "What?" Steve asked. "You gave her a gift, but more than that, you gave her dignity. You saw her. You really saw her. Not as a contestant or a story or a ratings moment, but as a human being." Steve nodded. He didn't have words for what he felt in that moment. But as he stood there, watching Sarah and her family hold each other, he understood something profound. This was why he did this job. Not for the money or the fame or the ratings, but for moments like this, for the opportunity to see people at their most vulnerable and to respond with compassion, for the chance to matter. The applause in the studio faded, but the emotional echoes of the moment lingered in the air like a sweet perfume. As the cameras turned off and the audience began to disperse, the intensity of what had just transpired settled into a different kind of silence. Steve found himself backstage, away from the bright lights and the cheering crowd. He leaned against a wall, still processing the reality of what had unfolded. His heart was heavy, but also full. He had done more than entertain. He had connected with someone in a profound way. That connection was what he lived for, yet it was also what made this job so challenging. Moments like this stayed with you. In the quiet of the backstage area, Steve could hear the muffled sounds of Sarah's family celebrating in the green room. They were laughing, crying, and sharing hugs, a cacophony of emotions that spoke to the weight of their experience. He couldn't help but smile. The joy they felt was palpable, a stark contrast to the heavy weight of the knowledge that time was short. As he stood there, he was approached by one of the producers, Lisa, who had been with the show for years. She had seen her fair share of contestants, but this was different. "Steve," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion, "that was incredible. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it." "Thanks, Lisa," Steve replied, his eyes still distant. "I just did what felt right." "You did more than that," she insisted. "You turned this into something real. You gave her a chance to be seen, to be heard. That's not just good television, that's life-changing." He nodded, appreciating her words, but feeling the weight of them. "We have a responsibility, you know? It's not just about the laughs or the ratings, it's about the people in front of us." Lisa smiled, her eyes shining with admiration. "You really stepped outside the box today. I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people." Steve hoped so. He hoped that Sarah's story would touch hearts, that it would inspire others to reach out, to connect, to embrace the fleeting moments of life. After a few moments, he decided to make his way back to the green room. As he entered, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of joy and disbelief. Sarah was sitting with her family, their faces glowing with a mix of tears and laughter. "Steve!" Sarah exclaimed when she saw him. She jumped up and rushed over, wrapping her arms around him once more. This time, it felt more like a family embrace. "How are you feeling?" he asked, genuinely wanting to know. "Overwhelmed," she admitted, stepping back but still holding his hands. "I never thought I'd get to experience something like this. I mean, I came here to have fun, to play a game. But this is beyond anything I could have imagined." "You deserve it," Steve said softly. "You fought hard to be here today, and now you have the chance to make those memories you talked about." Her family joined her, each one expressing their gratitude. Her husband, Mark, put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Thank you for doing this, for seeing her," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We needed this." Steve smiled and nodded, feeling the warmth of their gratitude wash over him. "It's my job to see all of you. You're not just contestants. You're real people with real stories." As they talked, Sarah's teenage daughter, Lily, approached. She looked shy, her eyes wide with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "Can I have a picture with you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," Steve replied, kneeling down to her level. "You're part of this story too." The moment was captured, a snapshot of joy amid uncertainty. They all gathered around, arms around each other, smiling for the camera. In that moment, they looked like a family unburdened by the weight of the world, if only for a few minutes. After the photos were taken, Sarah turned serious again. "Steve, I want to make sure this trip happens. I want it to be as perfect as we can make it. Can we talk about details? I want to make it special for my family." "Absolutely," Steve said, feeling a sense of determination welling up inside him. "We'll work with travel agencies, find the best spots, and make sure everything is arranged. You'll have the experience you deserve." The conversation flowed into practical matters, but beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent of something deeper. They were planning a journey, but it was more than just a vacation. It was a chance to celebrate life, to create lasting memories, to embrace the love that had carried them through the toughest of times. The next few days were a whirlwind. The production team worked diligently to arrange the logistics, securing the best accommodations and planning a beautiful itinerary that would allow Sarah and her family to experience Italy in all its glory. From the romantic canals of Venice to the art-laden streets of Florence, they would have a chance to immerse themselves in the beauty of life. In the days leading up to their departure, Steve frequently checked in on Sarah. He wanted to ensure that everything was falling into place, but he also felt a personal connection to her journey. Each conversation felt like a step towards something bigger, something beyond the confines of the game show. "Are you excited?" he asked her one afternoon over a video call. They were finalizing some last-minute details. "I can't believe it's really happening," Sarah replied, her smile radiant. "It feels like a dream. I just want to soak it all in." As they spoke, Steve noticed her energy. It was lighter, more vibrant. She seemed to be shedding some of the heaviness that had accompanied her throughout the game. There was hope in her voice, a glimmer of joy that had been absent before. "Make sure you take lots of pictures," Steve encouraged. "Capture every moment. You'll want to remember this." "Don't worry, I'll document everything," she promised. "I want to bring back memories for Lily, for my mom, for Mark. I want them to have something to hold on to." As the day of their departure arrived, the studio buzzed with excitement. Cameras were set up to document their journey, not as part of the show's typical format, but as a celebration of life. This was a chance to share a beautiful story with the world, a story of love, resilience, and the power of connection. When Sarah and her family arrived at the airport, they were greeted with cheers from the production team and the audience members who had followed their journey. It was a send-off filled with warmth and encouragement, a reminder that they were not alone in this fight. As they boarded the plane, Sarah looked around at her family, her mother, her husband, and her daughter, each one brimming with excitement and anticipation. They were embarking on a journey not just across the ocean, but into the heart of what it meant to truly live. As the plane took off, Sarah gazed out the window, watching the ground recede. She felt a sense of peace wash over her, a realization that this was more than just a trip. It was an opportunity to cherish every moment, to embrace the beauty of life, and to create a legacy of love that would endure long after she was gone.